She accepted his rejection without a single word of protest. She was already carrying the Alpha King's heir, and he would never know. No tears, no pleading, just a quiet voice that said, "I accept," and hands that fell, almost without thinking, to her stomach. He never noticed the gesture. He never knew what it meant. For 6 years, Selene Wren built a life in silence. She didn't wait for him. She didn't look back. She raised what he left behind, and she called it enough. But some things cannot stay hidden forever. And when she had no choice but to return, when the only road that could save her son led straight back to the man who discarded her, Selene Wren walked through that door not as the woman he rejected, as something he had never seen before. This is her story. And his. And what happened when the cost of one choice came due. Chapter 1. The words were spoken in the formal tongue of the pack, precise, irreversible, designed to leave no room for misunderstanding. I, Alpha Leoric Thane, hereby reject you, Selene Wren, as my mate. He did not look away when he said it. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the words themselves, but the steadiness of his gray eyes. As though this were simply a thing that needed doing. A door that needed closing, nothing more. The great hall was not empty. It never was when an Alpha made a formal declaration. The council stood at the edges of the room, 7 men and 2 women who had governed this pack long before Leoric Thane was born, and who intended to govern it long after. They watched in silence. They had arranged for exactly this. Selene felt the rejection move through her like cold water. Not sharp, not sudden, but thorough. It reached every part of her before she had. She had known it was coming. She had not known it would feel like this. I, Selene Wren, accept your rejection. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. In the moment, she was not thinking about pride. She was thinking about the words she could not say, the things she carried that he did not know about, that she had not yet found the right moment to tell him, and that she understood now, with perfect and terrible clarity. She would never tell him at all. Her hands moved to her stomach, just for a moment, just briefly enough that no one in that hall thought to look. He did not look. The council elder at the far end of the room exhaled, a small, satisfied sound. One of the women touched the sleeve of the man beside her. Quiet signals. A thing accomplished. Selene lowered her hands. "You are free to leave the territory by morning," Leoric said. His voice had not changed. "You will be given safe passage and provisions for the road." Safe passage. Provisions for the road. She almost said something then. The words were, "There is something you should know." And she felt them press against the back of her teeth like something trying to get out. She swallowed them. Because she understood in that moment what telling him would mean. It would mean staying. It would mean becoming a negotiation. Her son used as leverage in a political game she had never agreed to play. It would mean watching a man who had just formally, publicly, deliberately let her go, attempt to hold on to her for all the wrong reasons. She did not want to be kept. She wanted to have been chosen. Those were not the same thing. "Thank you," she said. It was not what anyone expected her to say. She saw it register in the room. A slight shift, a few exchanged glances. Even Leoric's eyes moved, just briefly, as though recalibrating. Selene did not wait to see what he would do with that. She turned. She walked to the door. She did not run, and she did not look back. And the sound of Enu, her footsteps on the stone floor of the great hall, was the last sound she made in the Thane territory for 6 years. Outside, the night was cold and very clear. She stood for a moment on the steps and let the air move through her, and she pressed one hand flat against her stomach and made a promise to the only person in the world who had not yet had a chance to disappoint her. I will be enough. You will never need anything I cannot give you. And you will never spend a single day of your life wondering whether you were chosen." Then she walked into the dark, and she did not stop walking until the lights of the Thane estate had disappeared entirely behind her. Let me tell you what 6 years costs a woman who was never supposed to survive them. Selene Wren did not run far. That was the first thing people got wrong when they imagined what a rejected mate did next. They imagined great distances, new continents, a clean disappearance into somewhere entirely unknown. But she had no money for great distances. She had a small pack of belongings, a body that was already beginning to change in ways she could not ignore, and a single name. A woman in a village called Dunmore, 3 days east, who was said to take in those with nowhere else to go. The woman's name was Petra. She was 60 years old, and she asked no questions, and she charged fair rent, and she had a spare room at the back of her cottage that smelled of dried herbs and old wood. Selene paid 3 months in advance with the provisions Leoric's people had given her for the road. She did not think about the irony of that for very long. She became a healer's assistant, then a healer. It turned out she had a competence for it that she had never been given the space to discover. A patience with pain, a steadiness in crisis, a memory for remedies that Petra said she had never seen in someone so young. Within a year, she was the one people came to first. Within 2, she had her own small practice above the market square. 2 rooms and a wooden sign she had carved herself because she could not afford to pay someone else to do it. She learned to be practical. That was what 6 years cost her first. The part of herself that had believed things would resolve on their own, that goodness was eventually rewarded, that waiting was a form of faith. She stopped waiting. She stopped believing that anything would come to her that she had not built with her own hands. It made her better at her work. It made her harder to know. She did not talk about where she had come from. In Dunmore, a woman alone with a son was common enough that no one pressed. Petra knew the broad shape of the truth and kept it with the same silence she kept everything, folded away, unremarked upon, present only in the way she sometimes looked at Selene across the kitchen table with an expression that said, "I see you," without requiring anything in return. The son was born in early spring. He came into the world quietly, as though he already understood that quiet was the condition of their life together. He had dark hair and gray eyes, and Selena looked at him for a long time in the first hours and felt something settle in her chest that had been loose and dangerous since the night she walked away from the Thane estate. She did not name him after anyone. She gave him a name that was entirely his own. He was, by the time he turned 6, the most serious child she had ever encountered. He did not chatter. He observed. He watched the people who came to her practice with the focused attention of someone much older, and sometimes, when a patient had left, he would ask her a single precise question about what she had done and why, and she would answer him honestly, because she had decided early that she would not condescend to him. He asked about his father once. He was 4. They were sitting by the window and the light was coming in at a low angle, and she had been thinking about something else entirely when he said, without preamble, "Do I have a father?" She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed several versions of the answer over 4 years. And still, when the moment came, all of her preparation collapsed into something much simpler. "Yes," she said. "You do. Where is he?" "Far from here." He considered this. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to whatever he had been doing. He did not ask again. She did not know whether to be grateful for that or quietly devastated by it. Both, she decided. Both at once. She heard about Leoric the way you hear about weather in another territory, at a distance, through other people, in fragments that arrived without warning and that she did not seek out. She heard he had married, a political match, exactly as the council had intended. She heard the marriage was formal and correct and produced no heirs. She heard 2 years after that it had ended, quietly, officially, without scandal. She did not let herself think about what any of it meant. She folded each piece of information away, and she did not take it out again, and she went back to her work, and her son, and the life she had built in the 2 rooms above the market square in Dunmore. It was enough. She had decided it was enough. She had gotten very good at deciding things. Before we continue, if this story is already sitting with you, if you felt something in this first chapter that made you want to stay, please leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it means a lot to me. And if you are not yet part of this library, subscribe. There are more stories here waiting for you. Chapter 2. It began the way most things that change a life begin, quietly, without announcement, in the middle of an ordinary day. She had been treating a farmer's wife for a recurring joint inflammation when Petra appeared in the doorway of her practice, with an expression Selene had not seen on her face before. Not alarm? Something quieter than alarm. The kind of look that precedes a sentence the speaker has been rehearsing. Then come home. Her son was sitting at the kitchen table when she arrived. He was pale in a way that was not tiredness. Petra had her hand on his shoulder, and he was looking at the table with the focused stillness he used when something was wrong, and he did not want to show it. Selene sat down across from him. She did not ask what happened. She looked at him the way she looked at patients, methodically, without panic, and she catalogued what she saw, and she kept her face exactly as still as his. Later, the healer who came from the next village used words she already knew. She had known them, in some part of herself, from the moment she saw Petra's face in the doorway. She listened to him carefully, and she asked 3 precise questions, and she thanked him for his time, and she closed the door behind him, and she stood in the entrance of her cottage for a long moment before she went back inside. The condition was manageable. That was the first thing. It was not a death. It was not even, with the right intervention, a diminishment. But the intervention required a specialist, a specific kind of knowledge that did not exist in Dunmore, that Petra did not have, that the healer from the next village did not have, that Selene herself, for all that she had taught herself over 6 years, did not have. She spent 3 days finding out where that knowledge existed. She was methodical about it. She wrote letters. She asked questions of travelers passing through. She followed every thread she could find with the same patients she brought to everything, and at 4 specialists in 4 different territories who had the training required. She crossed out the first name because the journey was too long and her son was not well enough to travel that far. She crossed out the second because the healer's reputation, when she pressed for details, did not hold. She crossed out the third because Petra, who knew more about the territories than Selene ever would, shook her head slowly and said only, "Not that one." She looked at the 4th name for a long time. The specialist practiced in a town called Asheville. Asheville sat 12 miles inside the eastern border of Thane territory. She folded the paper. She put it on the table. She stood up and she went to the window and she looked at the market square below, the wooden sign she had carved herself, the 2 rooms that had taken her 3 years to afford, the life she had assembled piece by careful piece from the wreckage of a single night 6 years ago. Petra did not say anything. She had learned, over 6 years, when Selene needed silence. The thing about being a woman who had gotten very good at deciding things was that the decisions did not stop being hard. They simply stopped being something she could afford to avoid. She turned around. "I need to ask you something," she said to Petra, "and I need you to answer honestly." "Always," Petra said. "If you were me, if it were your son, would you go?" Petra looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "There is no version of you that does not go. You have known that since you read the list." Selene looked back at the window, at the sign, at the life. She had built all of it to prove that she did not need anything she had not built herself. She had built it carefully and deliberately, and with both hands. And she had been proud of it in the quiet way she allowed herself to be proud of things, without announcement, without performance, simply as a fact she carried. And now the only road that existed ran straight back through everything she had spent 6 years walking away from. Not because she had failed, not because the life had not been enough, but because some roads do not ask your permission. They simply appear, and they lead where they lead, and the only real choice is whether you walk them with your eyes open. She picked up the folded paper from the table. She did not unfold it. She already knew what it said. "Pack for 2 weeks," she told Petra. "I will need someone to watch the practice." Then she went to tell her son that they were going on a journey, and she kept her voice steady the entire time. And she did not let herself think about what waited at the other end of it, until she was alone in her room that night with the door closed. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, and she pressed both hands flat against her knees, and she breathed slowly, in and out, until the shaking stopped. She was going back, not because she had forgiven him, not because she had forgotten, not because 6 years had softened the memory of a great hall and a steady gaze and words spoken in the formal tongue designed to leave no room for misunderstanding. She was going back because her son needed her to, and that, she had decided a long time ago, was the only reason that would ever be enough. They left on a Tuesday, before the market opened. Selene had chosen the hour deliberately. Fewer people, fewer questions, fewer of the small social transactions that would require her to explain where she was going and why, and to maintain the particular expression she had learned to wear when she wanted to seem unbothered. Open enough to satisfy, closed enough to end the conversation. Petra stood at the door of the cottage and watched them go. She did not offer reassurance. She had known Selene long enough to understand that reassurance, at this particular moment, would land wrong, would feel like someone telling her the cold was not that cold. Instead, she pressed a small wrapped package into Selene's hands and said, "For the road." And then she looked at the boy with an expression that said everything she was not going to say aloud, and the boy looked back at her, with his usual seriousness, and that was that. The first day was manageable. The road east was familiar for the first several hours. She had traveled it in the other direction 6 years ago, in the dark, with nothing but provisions and a decision. Traveling it now in daylight, with her son beside her and a hired cart beneath them, felt strange in a way she could not precisely name. Not worse, not better. Simply different in the way that all returns are different from departures. Her son was a good traveler. He sat beside her and watched the landscape pass and asked occasional questions about what things were called and how they worked. And she answered each one carefully, and the rhythm of it settled something in her chest that had been unsettled since the moment she picked up that folded piece of paper from the kitchen table. They stopped at midday beside a shallow river. He was tired, more tired than a son his age should have been from a morning of sitting still, and she noted this without letting it show on her face. And she filed it alongside all the other things she was holding quietly and not looking at directly, because looking at them directly served no purpose on a road with nowhere to turn back. He sat on a flat stone at the river's edge and looked at the water, and the afternoon light came through the trees at a low angle and fell across his face. And Selene, who had spent 6 years becoming very good at not doing the thing she was about to do, looked at him, really looked. The shape of his jaw, the particular way he held his shoulders when he was thinking, not tense, not slack, but with a kind of contained readiness, as though he was always slightly prepared for something. The gray of his eyes, which she had told herself for 6 years were simply gray, simply a color, simply a thing he had been born with that meant nothing beyond itself. She looked at him, and she saw his father so clearly that her breath stopped for a moment. It was not the first time she had seen it, but it was the first time she had let herself see it fully, without immediately looking away, without immediately finding something else to think about. But they were, 2 days from Thane territory. And in 2 days, other people would look at her son the way she was looking at him now. People who knew the Alpha's face. People who had served in his court, or traded in his markets, or simply lived long enough in the territory to know what he looked like when he was thinking. They would see what she saw. Her son looked up and caught her watching him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "You look like someone I used to know." He considered this with his characteristic seriousness. Then he said, "Someone good or someone bad?" Selene was quiet for a moment. "Someone complicated," she said. He nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and went back to watching the river. She watched him watching it, and she thought about what was waiting at the end of this road, and she thought about the version of herself that had walked away from it 6 years ago, with her hands pressed to her stomach, and 3 promises on her lips. She had kept every one of them. She intended to keep them a little longer. They made camp as the light failed. She built the fire, and he watched and asked questions, and she answered them. And after he was asleep, she sat beside the fire for a long time, with her knees drawn up and her eyes on the dark line of the road ahead. Somewhere at the end of it was the Alpha King. He did not know she was coming. He did not know she existed, in any meaningful sense. She had made sure of that, carefully and deliberately, for 6 years. Whatever he had thought about her since the night of the rejection, whatever conclusions he had reached or not reached, she was certain of one thing. She was not a problem he was currently solving. She was about to become one. She fed the fire, and she did not sleep for a long time, and in the morning she woke her son, and they got back on the road, and with every mile the territory she had spent 6 years forgetting grew closer and more real, and Selene Wren, who had gotten very good at deciding things, and very good at surviving them, rode toward it with her eyes open and her hands steady, and the particular stillness of a woman who has already made her choice and is simply waiting to see what it costs. Ashvale was smaller than she had imagined. She had built it up over 2 days of travel into something larger, a place that deserved the weight she was carrying toward it. But it was simply a town. Stone buildings and a market square, and a healer's practice on the eastern edge with a blue door and a sign she could read from the road. Ordinary, manageable, the kind of place that had no idea it was the end of something. She found lodgings first, a room above a grain merchant, clean and unremarkable, with a window that faced away from the main road. She paid 3 nights in advance, and she brought their bags upstairs, and she sat her son on the bed and looked at him in the way she had developed over 6 years. The clinical look, the healer's look, the look that let her assess without letting him see that she was assessing. He was tired from the journey, but his color was better than it had been in Dunmore. The road, or the change of air, or simply the fact of moving, something had given him a temporary steadiness that she noted and did not trust too much. "We will see the healer tomorrow morning," she said. "Today we rest." He nodded. He was already looking at the window. She had almost convinced herself it would be simple. Ashvale was inside Thane territory, yes, but it was 12 miles from the estate. 12 miles from the court, from the council, from everything that had sent her away 6 years ago. She would see the specialist. She would arrange the treatment. She would be gone before anyone who mattered had reason to notice her. She had told herself this on the road. She had told herself this at the lodgings. She was still telling herself this when she went downstairs in the late afternoon to ask the grain merchant where she might find an evening meal, and walked directly into Leoric Thane in the doorway of the building. This is the part of the story I always return to. Not the rejection. Not the years. This moment. In a doorway. In a town 12 miles from anywhere. Where 2 people who had spent 6 years on opposite sides of a decision came face to face before either of them was ready. She stopped. He stopped. He was not alone. There were 2 men behind him, guards or aides, who also stopped, reading his stillness the way people who serve a powerful man learn to read it. The grain merchant somewhere behind her had gone very quiet. Leoric Thane looked exactly as she remembered him, which was the first thing she noticed, and which she immediately resented. 6 years should have changed him more visibly. 6 years should have done something to the steadiness of those gray eyes, the particular way he occupied space, not aggressively, not performatively, but as though the space had organized itself around him without requiring his attention. It had not changed him. Or if it had, she could not see it yet. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "Selene," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, simply her name, said in a voice that had not changed either, as though he were confirming something he had not expected to need to confirm. "Alpha Thane," she said. The formality was deliberate. She watched him register it, a slight shift, almost imperceptible. The same recalibration she had seen in the Great Hall 6 years ago, when she thanked him for her safe passage. He had not expected her to be formal. She had not expected to need to be. And yet here they were. She had approximately 4 seconds, she estimated, before the situation became something she could not control. 4 seconds in which she was simply a woman in a doorway, and he was simply a man who had not expected to see her, and nothing had been said that could not be unsaid. Then her son appeared at the top of the stairs behind her. He had heard voices, or grown impatient, or simply followed her the way he sometimes did when she had been gone longer than a few minutes. He came down 3 steps and stopped, looking at the men in the doorway with his characteristic seriousness, and the afternoon light from the open door fell across his face, and Selene felt the 4 seconds end. She did not look at Leoric. She did not need to. She could feel the moment he saw her son. Not a sound. Leoric was not a man who made sounds when something surprised him, but a quality of stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. Deeper. The stillness of something that has stopped because it has encountered something it does not yet have words for. Her son looked at the men in the doorway with the calm assessment of a son who has learned, from a mother who never panicked, that most things can be looked at directly without requiring alarm. Then he looked at Leoric specifically, and Leoric looked back at him. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It felt longer. Selene counted her own heartbeats and kept her face exactly still and thought, with the particular clarity that arrives in moments of controlled catastrophe, that she had known this, was coming and prepared for it, and it was happening anyway, and the only thing left was to manage it. "We are passing through," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "My son requires a specialist. We were referred to the healer here." Leoric's eyes moved from the boy to her. Something was happening behind them. She could see it the way you can see movement behind a window even when you cannot see the room. He was thinking something, or feeling something, or beginning to understand something he was not ready to name. "How long?" he said. "A few days. Perhaps a week." He nodded once. His eyes moved back to her son. Just briefly, just for a moment, and then back to her. "You will have safe passage in this territory," he said, "and whatever resources the healer requires." Selene looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. The same words she had said in the Great Hall 6 years ago. She did not know if he remembered. She did not know what she wanted him to feel about that. She put her hand on her son's shoulder, gently, without pulling, and turned them both back toward the stairs. She heard Leoric and his men leave through the front door behind her. She heard the grain merchant exhale. She walked her son back up to their room, and she closed the door, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she did the breathing again. Slow, in and out, until the shaking stopped. It was done. The invisibility was gone. He had seen her, and he had seen the boy, and whatever was now moving behind those gray eyes was already in motion and could not be stopped. She had not lost the truth, not yet. But she had lost the silence, and she understood, sitting in that room above the grain merchant in Ashvale, that the silence had been the only thing standing between the life she had built and the conversation she had been postponing for 6 years. Chapter 3. He did not sleep that night. His aide, Corwin, who had served him for 11 years and who had learned to read the Alpha's silences the way a sailor reads weather, noted this without comment when he arrived at the study at dawn and found Leoric already seated at the desk with a cold cup of tea and the particular stillness of a man who had been sitting in the same position for a very long time. Corwin set down the morning reports. He did not ask. "The woman in Ashvale," Leoric said. "Selene Wren. Find out where she is lodging and make sure she has everything she needs." "Yes, my lord. And find out the name of the healer she is consulting. I want to know the boy is being seen by the right person." Corwin was quiet for a moment. Then, "The boy, my lord." "Yes." Another pause. Corwin chose his words with the care of a man who understood that some observations, once spoken, could not be taken back. "I noticed him as well. In the doorway." "I know you did," Leoric said. That was all. Corwin took the reports and left. Leoric sat for a long time after he was gone, looking at the cold tea, thinking about gray eyes in afternoon light, and the particular set of a son's shoulders, and a woman who had said thank you in exactly the same tone she had used 6 years ago when he had taken everything from her and offered her provisions for the road in return. He was not a man who avoided difficult conclusions. It was, in fact, one of the qualities the council had always valued in him: his willingness to follow a line of reasoning wherever it led, without flinching, without looking for the more comfortable answer. He had applied this quality to military decisions and territorial disputes and political negotiations for 15 years. He applied it now. The boy was approximately 6 years old. Dark hair, the precise gray of his eyes, the way he held his body, contained, observant, with a readiness that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with something carried in the bone. Leoric had seen that quality in one other person in his life. Every morning, in the mirror. He did not reach for a comfortable answer. He sat with the conclusion until it settled, the way he sat with every difficult thing, without drama, without the performance of being undone by it, simply letting it become true in the way that true. Things eventually become true, whether you invite them or not. Then he thought about what it meant. She had known. That night in the Great Hall, when she stood in front of the council and accepted the rejection in that steady voice and said thank you as though she were closing a transaction, she had already known. And she had said nothing. She had taken the provisions and the safe passage, and she had walked out of his territory, and she had built an entire life around a son he did not know existed, in a village far enough away that 6 years had passed without a word. His first instinct was something that resembled anger. He recognized it and set it aside, because he had learned long ago that his first instincts in matters of personal consequence were rarely the ones worth acting on. His second instinct was closer to the truth. She had not told him because telling him would have meant staying. And staying, on that night, in that hall, in front of that council, would have meant becoming a negotiation. Her son used as the weight on one side of a political scale. He could see it clearly now, the calculation she must have made in the seconds between his words and hers, the understanding of exactly what kind of man she was dealing with and exactly what kind of situation she was in. She had not been wrong. That was the thing he kept returning to, through the long hours of the night and into the gray morning. She had not been wrong about any of it. She had assessed the situation with a precision that, in any other context, he would have admired. She had protected the son the only way available to her. She had built a life. She had come back. Not for him, Not to claim anything, not to reopen what had been closed. She had come back because her son needed a healer, and there was no other road. He thought about the council, about Elder Marsh and the long months of negotiation that had preceded that night, about the alliance that had been secured by the rejection, and the marriage that had followed it, and the 2 years of formal correctness that had preceded its quiet dissolution, about everything that had been gained, and everything that had apparently been lost without his knowledge. The alliance had held for 4 years. It had provided exactly what the council promised: stability, trade, a period of peace along the eastern border. Leoric had never doubted that the political calculation had been sound. He had made his choice with full understanding of its cost, or so he had believed. He had not known the full cost. Nobody had told him the full cost, because the person who carried it had walked away in silence and not looked back. He stood up. He went to the window. The morning was coming in pale and cold over the eastern fields, and somewhere 12 miles away in a room, above a grain merchant, a woman who had spent 6 years not needing anything from him, was trying to get through another day without letting him see that his presence in a doorway had cost her something. He had seen it anyway. He had gotten very good, over 15 years of governance, at reading what people were working hard not to show. She was not ready for this conversation. He understood that, and he was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, genuinely uncertain what he deserved to ask of her, and what she deserved to be allowed to refuse. He was going to have to be very careful, and he was going to have to be honest with himself about something that the night's thinking had made unavoidable. The rejection had been a political necessity. The silence afterward had been his failure. He had not checked. He had not asked. He had made his choice and closed the door and allowed himself to believe that clean endings were a thing that existed. They did not exist. They never had. He turned from the window and called for Corwin. "I will be riding to Ashvale this afternoon," he said, when the aide appeared. "Alone." Corwin's expression did not change. "Yes, my lord." "And Corwin," he paused, "whatever conclusions you have reached about the boy, keep them to yourself until I tell you otherwise." "Of course," Corwin said, in the tone of a man who had already decided this independently. Leoric nodded once and went to prepare for the day, and for the first time in 6 years he found himself thinking about a woman not as an absence, not as a door closed, a thing concluded, but as a person who was 12 miles away, and who had, without intending to, brought back everything he had chosen not to examine. He came in the afternoon, as she had known he would. Not because she thought she could predict him. She had given up believing she understood Leoric Thane somewhere around the 2nd year of not thinking about him, but because she had seen his face in that doorway, and she knew what a man who has just followed a line of reasoning to its conclusion looks like. She had been waiting for the knock since morning. Her son was with the healer. She had arranged it deliberately. 2 hours, a thorough assessment, long enough that she would not have to manage 2 things at once. She was not certain whether she was grateful for the foresight or quietly terrified by what it said about her, that she had prepared for this the same way she prepared for everything, methodically, without letting herself feel it until the moment arrived. The moment arrived. She opened the door and looked at him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say yet that would not be the wrong thing. He looked back at her with that expression she remembered. Steady, precise, giving away less than he was thinking. He was alone. She noted that. "May I come in?" he said. Not quite a question. She stepped back from the door. The room was small, a table, 2 chairs, the window facing away from the road. He sat in one of the chairs without being invited, which was so entirely like him that she almost said something about it. She sat in the other. They looked at each other across the table, and the afternoon light came in at a low angle, and Selene thought, distantly, that she had spent 6 years making Sure, this conversation would never happen, and here it was happening anyway in a room above a grain merchant, in a town she had never heard of before 3 weeks ago. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since before the rejection." Something moved across his face, gone before she could name it. "You said nothing." "No." "Why?" She looked at him for a moment. What came out was the shortest answer. "Because I did not want to be kept," she said. "I wanted to have been chosen." Those are not the same thing. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that sits on a room the way weather sits on a landscape, present and undeniable, and not going anywhere quickly. Leoric was quiet for a long time. Then, "I did not know. I know you did not. If I had, you would have kept me." She said it without heat, simply as a fact. "You would have found a way to honor the council's arrangement, and also keep me, and you would have believed that was the same as choosing me. And I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether your son was the reason I stayed, or whether I was." He did not argue with this. He sat with it the way she had learned to sit with difficult things, without flinching, without looking for the exit. "The council arranged the rejection," he said after a moment. "I want you to know that I understood what it cost. I believed I understood." "You understood what you could see," she said. "You could not see everything." "No." A pause. "I should have asked." "Yes, I did not." "No," she said. "You did not." She was not going to soften it for him. She had decided that in the night, in the shaking until it stopped, in the long hours of preparing for this conversation. She was not going to be cruel. Cruelty had never been in her, not toward him, not toward anyone. But she was not going to make it easier than it was. "He looks like you," she said. "I noticed it more clearly on the road. I knew that coming into this territory meant I knew people would see it." "Is that why you did not come sooner?" "In 6 years there must have been." "He was healthy," she said simply, "until he was not." Another silence. This one different from the first, softer somehow, less like weather, and more like the moment after weather, when the air has changed and the world is recalibrating. "What does he know?" Leoric asked. "That his father is someone complicated, that he is far away." She paused. "That is all he has asked. He is 6. "He is." She looked at her hands on the table. "He is also. He is very much his own person. Whatever you might be expecting, he will surprise you." She had not intended to say that. The words had arrived before she could stop them. She felt him register it, saw the slight shift in his expression, the thing that was almost not quite hope. "Selene." He said her name the way he had said it in the doorway. Not a question, not a greeting, a confirmation. "I would like—" "I know what you would like," she said. Then, Leoric. It was the first time she'd used his name. She watched him go still. "You did not choose me when it mattered. You made a decision that was correct for your pack and your territory and your council, and I have never blamed you for the political calculation. But you did not choose me, and a declaration now, a want, an intention, a plan, is not the same as the choice you did not make 6 years ago. I have a life. I built it. It does not have a space in it that was waiting for you to fill." He was quiet for a long time. "I am not asking you to give me what I did not earn," he said finally. His voice had changed, still controlled, still precise, but with something underneath it that she had not heard there before. Something that cost him something to show. "I am asking you to let me understand what I did not understand before. That is all. I am not asking for more than that." Selene looked at him across the table. She had prepared for demands. For the alpha who believed his recognition of a mistake entitled him to its correction. For the man who had governed a territory for 15 years and understood the world primarily in terms of problems and solutions, she had not entirely prepared for this. For the particular quality of stillness that had settled over him, that was different from his ordinary stillness, that looked less like control and more like someone who has put down something heavy and is not yet sure what to do with his hands. "The healer says the treatment will take 2 weeks," she said. "We will be here 2 weeks." It was not a yes. It was not forgiveness. It was not the door opening. But it was not the door closing either. And Leoric Thane, who had learned over 15 years of governance to take the ground that was offered and not reach for the ground that was not, nodded once and said nothing further. And when he stood to leave, he paused at the door for just a moment, not long enough to require a response, just long enough to be seen. And then he was gone. Selene sat at the table for a long time after he left. She had not broken. She had not softened. She had said the true thing, clearly in plain language, and she had not apologized for it. She was not waiting. She had never been waiting. But she was, for the first time in 6 years, willing to be in the same room as the question. That is not a small thing. He called the council together on a Thursday morning without explanation. They came as they always came, unhurried, certain of their own importance, arranging themselves around the long table with the ease of men and women who had occupied this room for decades and expected to occupy it for decades more. Elder Marsh sat at the far end, as he always did, with his hands folded and his expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who has learned that neutrality is its own form of power. Leoric stood at the head of the table and waited until they had settled. "The woman currently in Asheville," he said. "Selene Wren." The room did not move, but something in it shifted, a quality of attention that sharpened without announcing itself. Marsh's folded hands tightened slightly. "Her son," Leoric said, "is mine." The silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It had texture, the particular density of a room full of people who are each rapidly recalculating. Marsh spoke first, as Marsh always did. "My lord, if this is a matter of—" "I am not finished," Leoric said, quietly, in the tone that ended things. Marsh closed his mouth. "My son will not be used as a political instrument. Not now. Not in negotiation. Not in alliance. Not in any arrangement this council believes it has the authority to make. He will be recognized formally, on my terms, when his mother and I have decided together what that recognition looks like. Until then, his existence is not council business." Another silence. Elder Vane, at the near end of the table, exchanged a glance with the woman beside her. Marsh's expression had moved from neutral to something more careful. "The territory's stability," Vane began, "is my responsibility," Leoric said, "as it has always been. I am not asking the council's opinion on this matter. I am informing you of my decision so that there is no confusion later about where the boundaries are." He looked at Marsh directly. 6 years ago, this council gave me a choice. I made it. I have lived with what it cost. A pause, not for drama, but because the next sentence required precision. I am making a different choice. Now. One that does not require your approval and will not be subject to revision. He left without waiting for a response. Corwin was in the corridor outside. Leoric did not stop walking. "Ride to Asheville," he said. "Tell her what happened here. All of it. What was said. What I said. What it means. Do not soften it, and do not add to it. And if she asks what you want from her..." Leoric considered this for a moment. "Tell her I am not asking for anything. She will know what that means." He went to his study, and he sat down, and he looked at the cold morning light coming through the window, and he thought about a woman in a room above a grain merchant 12 miles away who had spent 6 years not waiting for him, who had built something real and solid and entirely her own, and who had come back not for him but despite him, and who had looked him in the eye across a small table and said the truest thing anyone had said to him in a very long time. He did not know what she would do with what he had done. He had not done it to produce a particular response. He had done it because it was the correct thing, because his son deserved a father who made decisions based on what was right rather than what was politically convenient, and because Selene Wren deserved, at minimum, to live in a territory where her son's existence was protected by something more than her own silence. He owed her that much. He was fairly certain he owed her considerably more. But that was a different conversation, and one that could only happen if she chose to have it. He waited. It was not something he was accustomed to. Waiting without managing, without planning the next step, without filling the silence with action. He sat in his study and he read the morning reports, and he signed 3 documents, and he looked at the door every time he heard footsteps in the corridor, and he thought about the particular quality of stillness that had come over him in the room above the grain merchant when he had put down something heavy and not known what to do with his hands. He was still not sure what to do with his hands. Corwin returned at midday. He came into the study, and he stood in the doorway, and his expression said everything before he opened his mouth. "She is here, my lord," he said. "At the gate." Leoric set down the document he was holding. "Alone?" "Alone." He stood. He did not move immediately. He stood for a moment with his hands at his sides, breathing slowly, feeling something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Longer perhaps than 6 years. Longer perhaps than he had understood before now. Then he walked to the door, and down the corridor, and out through the entrance of the estate toward the gate where Selene Wren was standing in the pale afternoon light, not waiting, because she had never been waiting, but here, present, having made a choice of her own. He stopped a few feet from her. She looked at him the way she had looked at him across the table. Directly, without flinching, with the particular steadiness of a woman who has decided something and arrived at the decision through her own reasoning and is not going to apologize for it. "Corwin told me," she said. "I know. You did not have to do it today." "Yes," he said. "I did." She was quiet for a moment. The light moved across her face, and he thought about gray eyes in a doorway, and 6 years of distance that had apparently not been enough to change certain things that did not want to be changed. "I am not the woman I was," she said. "I want you to understand that. Whatever you remember, whoever you thought I was in that hall 6 years ago, she is not who is standing here." "I know," he said. "I am not asking for her back." "Then what are you asking for?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The chance to know who you are now," he said. "Nothing more than that. No terms, no timeline. Just the chance." Selene looked at him across the space between them. She had prepared again for something more demanding, for the man who governed by decision, who solved problems by resolving them, who would have a plan and a proposal and a set of conditions. She had been ready for that, had the answer prepared, had the boundary drawn clearly in her mind. She had not prepared for this version of him, for the particular quality of stillness that had nothing to do with control, for the man who had walked into a council chamber and made a choice without an audience, and without a guarantee, and without asking her permission first. Because it was right, not because it was useful. She thought about her son, who had his father's eyes, and his father's shoulders, and his father's. She thought about the promise she had made on the steps of the estate 6 years ago, in the cold and the dark, with her hands flat against her stomach. "You will never spend a single day of your life wondering whether you were chosen." 2 weeks, she said. "We are here for 2 weeks." "I know." "Then we will see," she said. "That is all I can give you. We will see." It was not forgiveness. It was not the door opening all the way. But she had come. She had heard what he did, and she had come, alone, without being asked, and she was standing in front of him in the pale afternoon light, with her eyes open and her hands steady. And Lyric Thane, who had spent 15 years making decisions and living with their costs, understood that this careful, conditional, hard-won willingness was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the most important thing anyone had offered him in a very long time. 2 weeks, he said. And for the first time since she had walked out of his territory 6 years ago, something in his chest that had been held very tightly let go. Some stories end with a door opening. Some end with a door closing. The best ones end somewhere in between, with two people standing in the same place, having finally decided to be honest about what they want. The 2 weeks passed, and then, because some things cannot be finished in 2 weeks, they did not end. Selene did not move into the estate. She did not give back the life she had built, the practice, the 2 rooms, the wooden sign she had carved herself. Those things were hers, and she kept them, because a woman who has built something real does not dismantle it simply because the weather changes. But she came back. Not all at once, not without difficulty, not without the particular slowness of trust that has been broken and is being rebuilt with both hands by 2 people who have learned, at considerable cost, what carelessness looks like. Leoric learned to be patient. It did not come naturally to him. Selene noted his effort without remarking on it, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Her son met his father on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before they were due to leave. The meeting was short and ordinary, and entirely unlike anything either of the adults had scripted in their heads. The boy looked at Leoric with his characteristic seriousness, and asked him 2 precise questions, about how the estate's water system worked, and Leoric answered both of them honestly and in detail. And that was that. Afterward, her son told her that he thought his father was quite knowledgeable about practical things. She did not tell Leoric this for several weeks. When she did, something happened to his expression that she had not seen there before, something unguarded and almost helpless, the look of a man unexpectedly undone by a small thing. She decided sometime around then that she was glad she had come back. Not because it was easy, not because the 6 years had dissolved into nothing, not because the night in the great hall had stopped being true. All of it was still true. The rejection, the silence, the cost of what had been chosen and what had been lost. None of it disappeared simply because something new was beginning. But she had made a promise once, on the steps of an estate in the cold and the dark, to a person who had not yet had the chance to be disappointed by the world. You will never spend a single day of your life wondering whether you were chosen. She intended to keep it. And for the first time, she did not have to keep it alone. The day she stopped waiting was the day he finally learned how to choose. That is not a coincidence. That is how it works. That is always how it works. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. And if you want more, you are welcome to subscribe. There are more stories waiting.